I signed my divorce papers on a Tuesday morning in a lawyer's office that smelled like burnt coffee, and by Tuesday night I was a billionaire, and I want you to sit with that timeline for a second, because I still sit with it myself some nights. Turning it over like a coin I can't quite believe landed the way it did. My name is Yolanda. I was 39 years old, freshly divorced from a man named Reginald after 11 years of marriage, and the ink on those papers, actual ink, actual pen, actual signature, was still drying on the clerk's desk when I left that building lighter than I'd felt in years, ready to go home to a life that was finally, completely, only mine to answer for. I stopped at a gas station on the way home. I want you to understand I wasn't a lottery person. I'd bought maybe 6 tickets in my whole life, always on impulse, always forgotten within the hour. But that day, standing at the counter with my newly single hands shaking slightly from the emotional weight of the morning, I bought 1 ticket for a jackpot drawing I'd seen flashing on the news that week. Some astronomical number I hadn't even bothered to fully process. I didn't check the numbers that night. I was too busy sitting on my kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, finally letting myself cry over 11 years I'd spent slowly disappearing inside a marriage that had stopped seeing me somewhere around year 6. I checked the ticket the next morning, coffee in hand, half distracted, expecting nothing. I checked it 3 more times after that, hands shaking for an entirely different reason than the day before. $1,204,000. Every single number matched. I sat on that same kitchen floor, ticket trembling in my hands, and the first coherent thought that cut through the roaring in my ears wasn't joy. It was dread, sharp and immediate, because I already knew, with a certainty that turned my stomach, exactly what was coming the moment Reginald found out. I had no idea yet how right I'd turn out to be, or how far he'd actually go to try to take half of something the law had never intended for him to touch. I didn't tell anyone for 4 days. Not my sister, not my mother, not a single soul, because some instinct in me, the same instinct that had quietly kept me sane through the last 3 years of a marriage that had grown cold and transactional, told me I needed a plan before I told a single person, especially anyone connected to Reginald. I want to back up and tell you about my marriage, because it matters for what happened next. Reginald and I met when I was 26, working as a paralegal at a mid-sized firm, ambitious and a little too trusting of a charming man who told me, on our 3rd date, that he could see us building an empire together. For the first 5 years, it felt true. We built a life, modest but steady, both of us working, both of us contributing. Then Reginald's contracting business hit trouble, bad partnerships, a lawsuit that drained savings we'd spent years building, and something in him hardened after that, turned inward and resentful in ways he never fully admitted, but that showed up everywhere. In how he spoke to me, in the slow, steady erosion of respect that I mistook, for far too long, for a rough patch instead of a pattern. The last straw wasn't dramatic. It rarely is. It was a Tuesday evening, 8 months before the divorce, when I told him I wanted to go back to school to finish the law degree I'd paused when we got married, and he laughed, not cruelly, just dismissively, in a way that somehow hurt worse, and said, "Yolanda, be realistic. You're not that person anymore. You're 40 next year." I filed for divorce 11 weeks later. It was, until that lottery ticket, the single bravest thing I'd done in over a decade. On day 4 after the jackpot, sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad and 11 years of paralegal training finally paying off in a way I never expected, I called the one person I trusted enough to bring into this before anyone else. My former boss, a sharp, formidable attorney named Odette Bellamy, who'd mentored me since I was 26 and had personally handled my divorce filing. "I need you to tell me something honestly," I said, once she picked up. "If I won a massive amount of money the day after my divorce was finalized, is there any legal way my ex-husband could claim part of it?" There was a long pause on the line. "Yolanda," Odette said slowly, "how massive are we talking? Are you enjoying the story? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you're enjoying it so far, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because believe me, this story is only getting started. Now let's get back into it." I told her the number. I heard her set something down on her desk, hard enough that it rattled through the phone. Say that again, she said. $1,204,000, I said. The ticket's in a safe deposit box. I haven't claimed it yet. I wanted to understand my legal exposure first. Odette was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted into the careful, methodical register I recognized from years of watching her work. First, and this matters more than almost anything else I'm about to tell you, what time did you buy that ticket, relative to your final signature on the divorce decree? I pulled up the gas station receipt, still saved in my wallet out of some instinct I hadn't fully understood until that moment. The decree was signed and filed at 10:47 that morning. The receipt on the ticket is timestamped 12:52 that afternoon. 2 hours and 5 minutes after your marriage was legally, fully dissolved, Odette said, and I could hear something in her voice settle, like a door closing firmly on a question that had been hanging open. Yolanda, that timing isn't just good. That timing is everything. In this state, marital property only covers assets acquired during the marriage, up to the date of legal dissolution. You bought that ticket as a single woman, on a single woman's income, with single woman's money. Reginald has no legitimate legal claim to a single dollar of it. Relief hit me so hard I had to sit down at my own kitchen table, even though I was already sitting. But, Odette added, and I heard the careful weight in that single word, legitimate legal claim and what a desperate man's lawyer will actually try are two very different things. If Reginald finds out about this before you've secured everything properly, I promise you, he will find a lawyer willing to argue anything, that the ticket was somehow purchased with marital funds, that you'd already won before the divorce and hid it. Whatever story gets a foot in the door. You need to claim this quietly, structure it properly, and have ironclad documentation of that timeline before word ever reaches him. How do I keep something like this quiet? I asked. Lottery wins get publicized. Don't they? Not in every state, and not if we move fast enough and use the right structure, Odette said. Give me 48 hours. Don't tell anyone else. Not your sister, not your mother, no one. And Yolanda, don't claim that ticket without me sitting right beside you when you do it. Odette moved faster than I'd seen her move on anything in the 6 years I'd worked for her. Within 2 days, she'd connected me with a private wealth attorney who specialized in anonymous lottery claims, structured through a properly formed trust, in one of the handful of states that allowed winners to remain unnamed publicly. We drove 3 hours to claim it, the two of us, Odette beside me the entire way, running through the exact language I'd use, the documentation we'd have ready, the timeline evidence, the gas receipt, the divorce decree timestamp, even security footage from the gas station that the attorney had already quietly subpoenaed to lock the timeline down before anyone could contest it later. You're building a case, I said to Odette at one point during the drive, before anyone's even accused me of anything. That's exactly what I'm doing, she said. Because I already know Reginald, even secondhand through 11 years of hearing you talk about him. A man who calls his wife unrealistic for wanting to finish her own degree is not a man who's going to gracefully accept losing access to money he feels entitled to, logic and law be damned. The claim process itself was almost anticlimactic after all that preparation, paperwork, verification, a trust structure that would hold the winnings under a name that wasn't mine, with me as sole beneficiary and trustee. Insulated by layers of legal architecture Odette and the wealth attorney had built specifically to be airtight against exactly the kind of challenge we both knew was coming eventually. I told my sister, Renee, 2 weeks later, once everything was fully secured. She cried, then laughed, then cried again, then asked the question I'd been asking myself every night since that kitchen floor moment. Are you going to tell Reginald? I don't have to tell him anything, I said. Legally, none of this exists to him. It's not marital property. It's not something he has any right to know about. Yolanda, Renee said carefully, you know this town. You know his cousin works at that same gas station. You know how fast things travel in a family like his. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, because she was right, and some part of me had known it the whole time, underneath all the careful legal architecture Odette and I had built. It took 6 weeks. Reginald found out on a Thursday, and he called my phone 11 times before I finally picked up. You've got to be kidding me, were the first words out of his mouth when I answered, no greeting, no pretense. $1 billion, Yolanda? $1 billion, and you didn't think that was worth mentioning to me. Why would I mention it to you, Reginald? I said, and I was surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. We're divorced. It's not your business. Not my business? His voice cracked up an octave, something between fury and disbelief. We were married for 11 years. 11 years, Yolanda. I built a life with you. And the second the papers are signed, you hit some jackpot and act like I don't even exist anymore. You didn't act like I existed for the last 3 years of that marriage, I said quietly, and I meant it to land exactly as hard as it did. You called me unrealistic for wanting to finish my degree. You made me feel small in my own home for years before I finally left. Where was your concern for what I deserved then? He was quiet for a moment, and I actually thought, for one brief, foolish second, that something might have landed. I'm getting a lawyer, he said instead, voice flat and cold. That ticket was bought hours after we signed. Everybody knows tickets like that don't just appear out of nowhere. You probably already knew you'd won before we even finalized anything. I'll prove it if I have to. Reginald, I said, and something in my voice must have carried more warning than I intended, because I heard him go quiet on the other end. I would think very carefully before you spend money you don't have on a lawsuit you're not going to win. We'll see about that, he said, and hung up. I called Odette immediately, hands steady this time, not shaking the way they had that first morning on my kitchen floor. He's getting a lawyer, I said. Good, Odette said, and I could hear something almost like satisfaction in her voice. Let him. We've had 6 weeks to prepare for exactly this. Yolanda, I need you to understand something clearly right now. This isn't going to be a fight about whether he's entitled to that money. Legally, he already isn't, and no lawyer worth their license is going to be able to argue otherwise once they see our documentation. This is going to be a fight about whether he can make your life miserable enough, long enough, that you consider paying him off just to make it stop. Will it work? I asked. Only if you let it, Odette said. And I don't think you're going to let it. The lawyer Reginald hired turned out to be a man named Chester Dubois, known locally, Odette told me with something like grim amusement, for taking cases other attorneys considered unwinnable and dragging them out for as long as a client's money held up, banking on settlements born from exhaustion rather than merit. His first move was a formal claim filed in family court, arguing, exactly as Reginald had threatened, that the timing of the ticket purchase was suspicious enough to warrant investigation, hinting without quite stating outright that I might have known about the win before the divorce was finalized and deliberately timed my purchase to exploit a legal loophole. Odette laughed out loud when she read the filing. This is desperate, she said. There's no factual basis here, just implication. He's hoping the judge will be sympathetic enough to a wronged ex-husband narrative to slow-walk this into a settlement conversation. We countered with everything we'd built in those first careful 6 weeks, the gas station security footage, time-stamped precisely, showing me purchasing the ticket alone, 2 hours and 5 minutes after the divorce decree was filed. The clerk's office timestamp on the decree itself. Bank records showing the ticket was purchased with $5 from an account that had been solely mine since the day the divorce was finalized, per the terms of our settlement, which had split our joint accounts cleanly weeks earlier. Chester Dubois pivoted almost immediately once that evidence landed, shifting from "she hid the win" to a new argument that Odette warned me was actually more dangerous, that Reginald had contributed, over 11 years of marriage, to my financial stability and confidence in ways that indirectly enabled me to make the winning purchase, and was therefore owed some form of equitable compensation, separate from a strict marital property claim. It's creative, Odette admitted, unable to fully hide her reluctant respect for the maneuver even as she prepared to dismantle it. It's also almost certainly going to fail, but it's going to cost you time and legal fees to make it fail, and I think that's exactly the point. I sat in my kitchen that night, the same kitchen where I'd cried on the floor and later shaken with disbelief over a winning ticket, and I felt something harden in me that had nothing to do with the money and everything to do with 11 years of being told, in one form or another, that my success was never fully mine to claim without someone else's fingerprints on it. Let him try, I told Odette. I'm not settling. Not $1. The court date landed 4 months after Reginald's first call, and by then, the case had quietly become something of a local curiosity, not publicly, since the trust structure kept my name shielded from the broader lottery announcement. But within the small legal community Odette and I both moved through, where word travels regardless of how carefully you try to contain it. I sat in that courtroom in a gray suit, hands folded, watching Chester Dubois lay out his equitable compensation argument with a confidence that might have unsettled me 11 months earlier, back when I still mistook confidence for correctness. My client spent 11 years building the emotional and financial foundation that allowed Ms. Yolanda to feel secure enough to make impulsive purchases like a lottery ticket, Chester argued to the judge. A sharp-eyed woman named Judge Marisol Adeyemi, who I could tell, even from the first 10 minutes, wasn't inclined toward theatrics. That foundation has value, Your Honor, even if it's not easily quantified. Odette rose when it was our turn, calm and unhurried in a way that 11 years of watching her work had taught me was more dangerous than any raised voice could ever be. Your Honor, opposing counsel is asking this court to establish a precedent that any financial success achieved by a divorced individual at any point after their marriage ends could theoretically be traced back to some vague notion of emotional foundation provided by a former spouse. I would ask the court to consider what that precedent would mean for every divorced person who goes on to build a business, get a promotion, or yes, buy a lottery ticket after their marriage has legally and completely ended. She laid out our timeline evidence methodically, the receipt, the decree, the bank records, the security footage, each piece landing with the quiet, undeniable weight of a case built by someone who'd spent 6 weeks preparing for exactly this moment before the opposing side had even filed their first motion. Judge Adeyemi took less than 15 minutes to return with her ruling. The court finds no legal basis for Mr. Reginald's claim, she said, voice flat and final. The ticket in question was purchased after the legal dissolution of the marriage, using funds that were solely Ms. Yolanda's own, from an account established after the divorce was finalized. This court will not entertain speculative claims of emotional contribution as a basis for equitable distribution of assets acquired after a marriage has legally ended. Case dismissed, with costs awarded to the respondent. Reginald didn't look at me as he left the courtroom. Chester Dubois didn't either. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong, though not in the way I expected. 2 weeks after the ruling, I got a call from an unknown number that I almost let go to voicemail. Exhausted from months of legal tension, I was still slowly unwinding from my shoulders. Something made me answer. It was Reginald's mother, Patricia, a woman I genuinely loved during my marriage, one of the few relationships from those 11 years I still quietly grieved losing. I'm not calling to ask you for anything, she said quickly, before I could even fully process who was on the line. I want you to know that first. I'm calling because I'm ashamed of my son, and I needed to say that to someone, and you're the only person who'd actually understand why. We talked for almost an hour. Patricia told me things I hadn't fully known, that Reginald had taken out a personal loan to pay Chester Dubois's fees, certain the case was a sure thing. Certain the emotional argument would land with a judge the way it might have landed with a room full of sympathetic family members. That he was now deeper in debt than he'd been at any point during our marriage, having gambled real, tangible money on the theoretical chance of claiming mine. He always did that, Patricia said quietly. Bet everything on being right instead of actually checking if he was. I felt something complicated sitting with that information, not triumph, exactly, though I won't pretend there wasn't some small, honest part of me that registered a kind of grim justice in it. Mostly I felt tired, the particular tiredness that comes after a long fight finally ends and you're left blinking in the sudden quiet, unsure what to do with hands that had been braced for impact for months. I'm sorry for what he put you through, both during your marriage and after, Patricia said before we hung up. You deserved so much better than 11 years of being made to feel like your dreams were unrealistic. I hope you know that now, whatever you decide to do with everything you've been given. I sat with that call for a long time after we hung up, feeling something in my chest finally, fully unclenched for what felt like the first time in over a year. I want to tell you what I actually did with $1 billion, because I think that matters more than the lawsuit, more than the courtroom victory, more than watching Reginald walk out of that room without looking at me. I finished my law degree first, the same one Reginald had once called unrealistic, the one I'd paused for a marriage that ultimately couldn't hold space for both his ambitions and mine. I enrolled 6 months after the ruling, sitting in a classroom at 40 years old surrounded by students half my age, and I have never in my life felt more exactly where I was supposed to be. I set up a foundation quietly, working with Odette to structure it properly, offering full scholarships and mentorship specifically for women rebuilding their lives and careers after divorce, women who'd spent years, the way I had, slowly disappearing inside someone else's definition of what they were capable of. I named it, simply, the Second Decree Fund, a small private joke only Odette and I fully understood, referencing the exact legal document that had, however unexpectedly, set my entire new life in motion. I bought my sister Renee a house outright, no mortgage, the kind of gift that made her cry for a solid 10 minutes on my kitchen floor, the same floor where I'd once cried over a marriage ending and later shaken with disbelief over a ticket that changed everything. I didn't buy anything extravagant for myself, not really, not in those first months. Mostly I bought back time, quit the paralegal work I still did out of habit more than necessity, gave myself the space to actually finish school, actually build the foundation, actually sit with who I was becoming without 11 years of someone else's low expectations pressing down on the shape of it. Odette became more than a mentor in those months. She became something closer to family, the person who'd believed in the timeline evidence before I'd even fully believed in my own right to keep what was legally, completely mine. You know what I keep thinking about, she told me one evening, months after the case closed, over dinner at a restaurant we'd started making a regular tradition. 2 hours and 5 minutes. That's all the space there was between the life you were leaving and the life that was about to start. I don't think most people get their turning point marked that precisely. You got a timestamp. It's been 3 years now since I sat on my kitchen floor with a winning ticket shaking in my hands, and I still think, sometimes, about that specific window of time, 10:47 in the morning to 12:52 in the afternoon. 2 hours and 5 minutes that separated an old life from an entirely new one. I graduated from law school last spring, top of my class, 42 years old, and unbothered by every person who might have once told me that was too late for a fresh start. I work now, part-time by choice, at the same firm where I once answered phones as a paralegal, except now my name is on the door as a partner, specializing, unsurprisingly to anyone who knows my story, in family law, with a particular focus on protecting the assets of clients navigating divorce and its aftermath. The Second Decree Fund has now put 14 women through school, funded 11 small businesses, and quietly rebuilt more lives than I ever expected when Odette and I first sketched out its structure on a legal pad in my kitchen. Reginald and I haven't spoken since that courtroom. I heard, through Patricia, who I still talk to occasionally, that he eventually settled his debts, found steadier footing, even remarried last year. I hope that's true. I hope, wherever he is, he's finally learned something about betting everything on being right instead of checking whether he actually is. I think about the timing often, not with anger anymore, not really, but with a kind of quiet wonder at how precisely life sometimes draws its lines. 2 hours and 5 minutes. Long enough to leave one life completely behind. Short enough that an entirely new one was already waiting right there at a gas station counter I almost didn't stop at. People ask me sometimes if I believe in fate, given how the story unfolded, the exact timing, the exact numbers, the exact moment everything changed. I tell them I don't know about fate, but I know about timelines, about documentation, about the particular kind of freedom that comes from finally having something entirely, legally, undeniably your own, with the paperwork to prove it. The ink wasn't even dry on my divorce when my whole life changed. But I want you to remember, if you take nothing else from my story, that the divorce came first. I chose myself before I ever bought that ticket. Everything else was just the universe, or luck, or timing, finally agreeing with a decision I'd already made on my own. The end.